Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Histories of Horror. It's January 25th, 2026. I'm Cy Marie Johnson.
And I'm A.L. Knuckles. If you're listening to us tonight from anywhere along the 101 or the winding curves of Highway 20, you know exactly what the air feels like right now. It's that heavy, salt-laden Oregon mist that doesn't just sit on the ground. It hangs in your lungs. It obscures the Douglas firs until they look like giant, jagged teeth against the gray sky.
Tonight, we're coming back home to my home state. We're talking about the Oregon coast, specifically the Newport area. For many of us, the coast is a place of healing. It's where you go to hear the Pacific roar, to see the horizon sparkle like a gemstone in the summer. But the ocean is a sleeping giant, AL. And when it wakes up in the winter, it brings the detritus of the deep to the shore.
And sometimes the shore reveals things we'd rather keep buried. Tonight's episode of Histories of Horror is a deep, dark dive into a series of tragedies that have haunted three grieving families and one entire state for over 3 decades. We're talking about the unsolved Oregon coast killings, the cluster of disappearances and murders that occurred between 1984 and 1995.
We're looking at 5 young women: Sheila Swanson, Melissa Sanders, Kelly Disney, Jennifer Essin, and Cara Lees. But we're going to discuss tonight the tally might be much higher because when you look at the names involved, monsters like John Arthur Ackroyd and Bobby Jack Fowler, you realize that Highway 20 wasn't just a road, it was a corridor of death.
We're going to use everything we have tonight: the original case files, the haunting 2023 documentary Lost Women of Highway 20, and the newly surfaced evidence that has come to light leading up to this 2026 anniversary. Guy, where do we even begin with a mystery this dense?
We start with the girls who were just trying to enjoy a weekend at the beach. We start at Beverly Beach, May 1992.
May 1992. Beverly Beach State Park is one of the crown jewels of the Oregon State Park system. It's got that iconic bridge you drive under, the creek that runs through the middle of the campground, and the tunnel that leads you right out into the sand.
It's a place where you feel safe. You're surrounded by families in RVs and tents. 19-year-old Sheila Swanson and 17-year-old Melissa Sanders were there with the Sanders family. They were from Lynn County, the Willamette Valley. They were valley kids coming over the mountain for a classic Oregon weekend.
On May 3rd, they decided to take a walk. They left the campsite. They were supposed to be gone for a little while, but they never came back.
Now, AL, we've talked about this on the show before, the runaway myth. In 1992, if you were a teenager and you went missing, the police almost instinctively labeled you a runaway. It was the default setting. It saved paperwork. But Sheila's mother, she fought that narrative with everything she had.
She had a very specific reason, too. Sheila had epilepsy. She required daily medication. She hadn't taken it. You don't run away to start a new life without the medication that keeps your brain from seizing. It's a death sentence.
But the authorities didn't listen. Not at first. They waited. They watched the days turn into weeks, then months. It wasn't until October 13th, 1992, 5 months later, that the truth literally emerged from the brush.
A hunter was navigating an isolated wooded area off a logging spur near Eddyville. This is about 20 miles west of Newport, right off US Highway 20. He found skeletal remains, 2 sets of them.
20 miles east of Newport, you mean?
Yes.
The medical examiner confirmed it. Melissa and Sheila. The cause of death was never officially released to the public, likely to protect the integrity of the investigation, but the ME was clear. They had met with foul play. They hadn't wandered off and gotten lost. They had been taken.
And this is where the investigation hit a brick wall. No witnesses at the park. No one saw a struggle. No one saw a suspicious vehicle, or rather, everyone saw too many vehicles. Highway 101 is a constant stream of traffic.
But there was a clue: a small industrial-style rivet, the kind used in heavy canvas or work clothes, was found near the remains. At the time, it was just a piece of metal. Years later, when the name John Arthur Ackroyd came up, that rivet would start to look a lot like a signature.
While the Sheila and Melissa case was sending shockwaves through the valley, Newport was already sitting on a decade-old ghost story: the disappearance of Kelly Disney.
March 1984. Ellie is 17. She's in a car with her older boyfriend, Robert Ellis. They're driving. They have an argument, the kind of heated emotional spat that happens when you're 17 and the world feels too big. She tells him to pull over. She gets out of the car and starts walking along Highway 101.
It's almost 1 a.m. A sheriff's deputy actually spots her. He sees a young girl walking alone on the highway. He doesn't stop her. Maybe he should have. Maybe he couldn't have. But that was the last time Kelly Disney was seen by anyone who would admit to it.
For 10 years, her family lived in that horrific limbo. Is she alive? Is she in another state? Then comes 1994.
And this is the part that sounds like a campfire story, but it's 100% true. A man walks into a police station in Newport. He is carrying a human skull.
Think about the logistics of that. He just sets it down on the counter. He says he found it near an abandoned car east of town, a spot known as a quote unquote party spot for local teenagers.
But here's the chilling revelation. Investigators talked to kids who had been partying at that exact car just a few days prior. They were sitting on that car, drinking and hanging out. They all said the same thing. There was no skull here.
That means the skull was placed there. 10 years after she vanished, someone who had been keeping her remains decided to put her back in the public eye. It was wrapped in a piece of old carpet. It was a trophy that the killer was finally done with.
Dental records confirmed it was Kelly, but the rest of her body never found. It was a psychological game. Someone wanted the town to know that they were still there. And as it turns out, the someone might have been watching the police station that very day.
The mid 90s in Newport were a time of absolute paranoia, and for good reason. In January 1995, Jennifer Essin and Cara Lees, both 16, were walking home after a night out.
They were best friends. They were doing what teenagers do, walking between houses. They headed towards Highway 101 and vanished into the night. No struggle, no screams.
Several weeks later, a logger working a densely wooded road near Newport came across their bodies. They had been strangled to death. The killer hadn't hidden them well. They were covered with brush in what police called a half-assed attempt to conceal the crime.
This was different. Sheila and Melissa were skeletal by the time they were found. Kelly was just a skull. But Jennifer and Cara were a fresh crime scene. The community was in a state of grief and shock. It felt like the coast was being hunted by a phantom.
And the question came, is this one person? Is there a Newport serial killer who has been active since 1984? Or are we looking at a crossover?
Let's talk about suspect number one, John Arthur Ackroyd. If you want to understand the lost women of Highway 20, you have to understand this man.
Ackroyd wasn't a drifter. He wasn't a stranger. He was an Oregon Department of Transportation, that is, ODOT mechanic. He lived in Sweet Home, Oregon. He lived in Santiam Junction. He literally worked on the highway where these girls disappeared.
He wore the orange vest. He drove the state-issued trucks with the flashing lights. He was the person you were taught to trust if your car broke down on a lowly stretch of Highway 20.
But behind that helpful mechanic persona was a monster. He was already a suspect in the 1978 murder of Kay Turner, a jogger who was killed near Black Butte. He was the prime suspect in the 1990 disappearance of his own stepdaughter, 13-year-old Rashonda Pickle.
And the link to Sheila and Melissa is terrifying. Ackroyd frequented the same circles as them. He was in Sherry's in Lebanon. He knew where they were. He had even mentioned his property near Newport to them.
The day after Sheila and Melissa went missing from Beverly Beach, Ackroyd showed up to work at the ODOT shop. He was covered in blood. His coworkers noticed. He laughed it off and said he'd been gutting a deer.
No one called the police. Why would they? It's Oregon. People gut deer. But the timing was perfect. And that rivet found near the girls, Ackroyd was a mechanic who worked with those exact types of fasteners every single day.
The district attorney in Newport actually had a case ready to go against Ackroyd for the double murder of Sheila and Melissa. They had circumstantial evidence. They had the blood on the clothes testimony. But Ackroyd was already serving life for Kay Turner's murder. The DA decided that a second life sentence wouldn't change anything.
They let him stay in prison for the one murder, and the families of Sheila and Melissa never got their day in court. Ackroyd died in Oregon State Penitentiary in 2016. He took the location of Rashonda Pickle's body to his grave.
But then we have suspect number 2, Bobby Jack Fowler. And AL, this guy is a different kind of evil.
Fowler was a transient, a meth head, a man who moved between cities like a virus. He'd been married, had kids, but his real life was a trail of sexual assault and violence that spanned from Texas to British Columbia.
In 1995, the same year Jennifer and Cara were killed, Fowler was in Newport. He was arrested after a woman jumped from a second-story balcony of an apartment to escape him. She was naked, bleeding, and her ankles, were bound with rope.
That woman's bravery likely saved a dozen other lives. Fowler was sentenced to 16 years, but it wasn't much later that DNA technology tied him to the Highway of Tears murders in Canada. He was a confirmed serial killer.
So now we have a problem. We have two monsters in the same place. Ackroyd, the local mechanic who knew the woods, and Fowler, the violent drifter who lived for the thrill of abduction.
Investigators believe Fowler is the most likely candidate for the stranglings of Jennifer and Cara. The MO fits the history and abduction of bondage. But could he have killed Kelly Disney?
It's possible, but Kelly's skull being dumped at a local party spot 10 years later, that feels like it's a local's move. That feels like someone who wanted to see the town's reaction. It feels like Ackroyd, or it feels like a third person that we haven't even named or even discovered.
As we sit here in 2026 looking back on these cases, 2023 documentary Lost Women of Highway 20 really changed the conversation. It showed how these women were failed by a good old boy system that protected men like Ackroyd because they were one of the good guys.
It also showed the resilience of the families. The Sanders family, the Swanson family, the Disney family. They never stopped asking questions. They never let the fog swallow their daughters' names.
There is still hope. Every year, DNA technology gets more sensitive. We're now at a point where we can pull profiles from a single skin cell left on a piece of carpet or a mechanic's rivet.
We're also seeing more people come forward. Now that Ackroyd is dead, people who were afraid of him for 30 years are finally starting to talk. They're remembering things, weird comments he made, tools that went missing, trips he took into the woods randomly.
The Oregon coast is a place of breathtaking beauty, but tonight we remember that the beauty hides fury, and the fury of nature is nothing compared to the fury of a predator.
Sheila, Melissa, Kelly, Jennifer, Cara, Rashonda. We say their names so they aren't lost in the mist. All right, AL, we need to talk about the culture of the hunt because people often ask, how did a guy like John Arthur Ackroyd, this burly orange-vested ODOC mechanic, even get close to girls like Sheila and Melissa? The answer lies in a hexagonal building with a glass roof. Sherry's, coffee, and pies.
Man, if you grew up in Oregon in the 80s or 90s, Sherry's wasn't just a restaurant, it was the social hub. In towns like Lebanon and Sweet Home, there wasn't a mall. There wasn't a huge theater. You went to Sherry's. You sat on those booths for 3 hours on a Friday night, drinking bottomless coffee and sharing a slice of Menenberry pie.
Every kind of pie under the sun, it was definitely the place to be, and that is exactly where the Predators set up shop. Ackroyd lived in the valley, Sweet Home and Lebanon area, but worked the Highway 20 corridor. He was a fixture at the Lebanon Sherry's, and remember, Sheila and Melissa were from that same area.
This is the part that gives me the absolute creeps. Ackroyd wasn't one of just some guy in a corner. He was social. He'd chat up waitresses, he'd talk to kids. He had this disarming, good old boy, blue collar vibe. He used the restaurant culture of the 90s as a reconnaissance mission.
Think about the geography. You're in Lebanon. It's a Friday night. You're talking about your plans for the weekend. Hey, we're heading over to Beverly Beach to camp. Ackroyd is sitting 2 booths away. He hears the location. He knows the route. He knows every mile of Highway 20 because he's the one that maintains the asphalt.
And because he was a regular, he was invisible. That's the irony of these small town connections. He wasn't just a stranger lurking in the bushes. He was a guy who sat in the booth for every morning. The Lost Women of Highway 20 documentary really highlighted how he used these social hubs to build a mental cap of who was vulnerable.
It makes you look at every 24-hour diner differently. He wasn't just eating breakfast, he was scouting. He knew the girls' routines, he knew their social circles. By the time they arrived at that campsite at Beverly Beach, he wasn't finding them by accident, he was intercepting them.
Now we have to pivot from the local predator to the drifter. We need to talk about Bobby Jack Fowler and the Highway of Tears. Because if you think the Oregon coast cases are haunting, what happened in British Columbia is a masterclass in forensic persistence.
We're talking about Colleen McMillan, 1974. She was 16 years old. hitchhiking to visit a friend in Lac La Hache. She vanished. Her body was found a month later, but for decades, literally decades, the case was ice cold.
This is where the 2012 DNA breakthrough changed everything. See, the Canadian authorities had kept a tiny, tiny sample of DNA from Colleen's clothing, but back in the 70s and 80s, we didn't have the tech to do anything with it. It was just a maybe in a freezer.
Fast forward to the EPANA task force. They run that DNA through the system and it hits. It hits on a guy who died in an Oregon prison in 2006, Bobby Jack Fowler.
This sent shockwaves through the Pacific Northwest. Why? Because it proved that Fowler wasn't just a local creep in Newport. He was a cross border serial killer. He was using the entire Pacific corridor, from the highway of Tears in BC down to the Highway 101 in Oregon, as his personal hunting ground.
And the parallels, AL, they're identical. Colleen was hitchhiking. Kelly Disney was walking along the highway. Jennifer and Carr were walking along the highway. Fowler's type was the girl on the move, the girl between 2 points.
When the RCMP, Royal Canadian Mounted Police, came down to Oregon to talk to the Newport PD, the pieces started falling in place. They realized Fowler had been in Newport right when Jennifer and Cara vanished. He was driving a beat-up old car, living that transient meth-fueled lifestyle.
But here's the forensic tragedy. Because Fowler was a drifter, he didn't leave the local trail that Ackroyd did. He left DNA. But back in 1995, we weren't testing DNA for every missing persons case. If the Newport PD had been able to link Fowler to the Canadian crimes in real time, they might have saved victims in 3 different states.
It's that minor mirror effect. You have Ackroyd, the guy who knows every tree in the forest, and you have Fowler, the guy who is just a shadow passing through. Both of them were just using the vulnerability of young women on the road. The DNA breakthrough in Colleen's case didn't just solve a Canadian mystery. It unmasked the monster that was living in a Newport apartment while our girls were disappearing.
Finally, we have to talk about our reaction to the 2023 documentary Lost Women of Highway 20. AL, I watched this with a knot in my stomach the entire time.
Same here. First of all, the cinematography. They captured that Oregon gray, the oppressive, wet, heavy atmosphere where the trees look like they're closing in on the road. It didn't feel like a crime show, it felt like a ghost story.
But the part that really got me, seeing Ackroyd's former ODOT coworkers finally talk. For 30 years, there was this code of silence, not necessarily a malicious one, but a he's one of us mentality. Seeing those men sit on camera and admit, yeah, he showed up covered in blood and we just let it go, was devastating.
It was the interviews with the families that broke me though. Sheila's mother, Melissa's family. They've been shouting into the wind for decades. The documentary gave them a platform to say, we weren't crazy. We knew our daughters didn't just run away.
It also exposed the good old boy system in the local police department and DA offices. The documentary didn't pull punches. It showed how the authorities prioritized easy closures over actual justice. They wanted the cases to go away because a serial killer is bad for tourism. A runaway is just a social problem.
When you see the footage of the search for Rashonda Pickle, Ackroyd's stepdaughter, and you realize he was helping with the search, it's sick. It's a level of manipulation that the documentary captured perfectly.
It's 2026 now, 3 years since that doc came out, and it feels like the culture has finally shifted. We're no longer calling these girls lost, we're calling them stolen.
And if you haven't seen it, go watch it, but be prepared. It's not an easy sit. It's a reminder that the fog doesn't just hide the killers, it hides the truth until someone is brave enough to shine a light into it. That's our show for tonight. If you have any information regarding the unsolved cases in Newport or along Highway 20, please reach out to the Oregon State Police or the Newport Police Department. No detail is too small.
We'll be back next time with another chapter of Histories of Horror. Until then, stay out of the fog and keep your doors locked.
Keep an eye on the road ahead and remember, there's horror in all of our histories. Until next time, good night.